presentation. I love this format because I can easily share it with my students one day, maybe. Today I'm talking about art of the empire. So this is just really a continuation from where we left off in the French Revolution. We're now in the Napoleonic age. So he has declared himself emperor after rising through the ranks in the military. Napoleon Bonaparte, 1804, that happens. The coronation of Napoleon, Jacques Louis David. That's, I think, actually where I left off in talking the last assignment. But a pretty cool painting as a precursor to set the stage for how Napoleon ruled his emperor or empire. So, a couple things I just wanted to point out for historical context. There was a lot of plundering of artifacts, which I think connects to one of the themes, including like artifacts of Egypt. And we saw a few different paintings with Egyptian subject matter, which was neat. The Napoleonic Code was a big legacy that was left behind from this time, creating a lot of like our modern ways of education. And unfortunately, it sucked for women, but there are some societal shifts that were major and have stuck around since this Napoleonic Code. And lastly, Napoleon and his empire. Empire is a really key word there because he was really determined to conquer all of Europe, and even bit off a little bit too much for him to chew in Russia, which led to his downfall. But that conquering was, a lot of what was depicted, a lot of the Napoleonic Wars, where he's trying to expand his empire. So the historical context, I think, lends itself a lot to the themes of revolutionary art. The main theme I've bolded as propaganda. So a lot of this artwork, especially the contemporary historical scenes, are painted with really the sole purpose to serve as propaganda, either rewriting negative publicity, which I'll talk about on the next slide, or just paint Napoleon in the best light possible and what he's doing in the best light possible, and in some ways literally rewriting the story, as we saw with visiting the Jaffa house. There was a fascination with exoticism, so that is linked to this expansion of the empire. There's a lot of artworks. I was doing additional reading in my gardener's textbook, and there's a lot of artworks from this time period that is a big focus, like Le Grand Odalisque, and we have that in the AP art history class too. But I think that's like a good example of showing this Orient, this really like intriguing new world that the French have now encountered with these conquests. So a lot of that exotic architecture, clothing, and that's emphasized a lot in the art from this time period. And then I liked this quote from talking about a specific piece. I can't recall which one, but in the militaristic scenes, there seems to be a lot of, even with showing atrocious acts of violence, they're painted in a way that has graceful beauty. And I found that to be interesting. And I threw it in here because I did think it was kind of a common thread with a lot of this, specifically the historical contemporary paintings, in the way they're depicting, corpses. So, okay, so two works just to set the stage a little bit before my chosen are Napoleon crossing the Alps. This painting is iconic. It is like to me, it's one of the best propaganda paintings. His leadership on this, wild and crazed horse, and he's just like this steady, commanding leader. The backdrop of the Swiss Alps, it incorporates a lot of just like grandeur and really glorifying Napoleon as a leader. And I love like the sweeping red cape is such a cool use of like the wind and really pushing that figure in the foreground and his hand pointing to the sky. It's just to me, a very powerful image. And then that propaganda piece of those names also etched in stone, where Napoleon is, seeing himself right next to these leaders, or maybe I guess the artist was seeing it for him, but you know. Yeah, so that's the Jacques Louis David painting that we had seen. The other artwork I included was the Theseus slaying the centaur. So I liked learning about the sculpture a lot. I think it's neoclassic sculpture is just really beautiful, and seeing like the references to classical sculpture in the 1800s is just really cool to me. But I chose this image to kind of recap because I think in the themes there was a lot of painting from this time that is from antiquity and stories of antiquity. And while most of the paintings we saw in the lecture were of, military battles or aftermaths from battles being retold, I think something that, maybe could be highlighted more in looking at revolutionary art are these depictions of ancient narratives to create like a connection to the modern political happenings. Well, at least in the propaganda way that they are used. So, with that, the artwork I chose is by Francois Girard, Bel- Belisarius, perhaps, from 1797. So a little earlier, pre Napoleon, but I think it still fits all of these same themes. Even if, I should have probably put a side by side of Napoleon crossing the Alps to this. Really, you have the same monumental figure, who is just really like in the forefront of this picture or this image, and this beautiful like landscape backdrop behind, which isn't essential to the story. It's all about this figure in the forefront. So I thought this was neat because it kind of connected a lot of the themes of this. It's a story from antiquity. This was Belisarius was a Byzantine general. So again, we're looking at like someone who's in the military. Typically, he's like depicted begging or in more cowardly, or not cowardly, that's probably the wrong word, but typically pictured begging. Here, he's really standing tall and his body is like elongated, referencing a lot of the depictions Napoleon was painted in. And it's really showing like this heroicism of this figure, Belisarius, who is like this regarded general that ended up having a bad reputation or bad standing politically and was blinded. Yeah, back to the themes. I think it is a neat image because it is showing that heroic figure. It's painted in a really similar to me, like visual way of the prominence in the foreground, this landscape setting. He's striding forward. His pose is really reminiscent of like neoclassic statues. And he's carrying this guide who's been bitten by a snake. So also we have like a level of drama in retelling the story with these visual elements. And but they're kind of rewriting the story, as Napoleon often did, in really highlighting the heroicism of him carrying this boy who's bitten by this snake wrapped around his ankle. Ew, eek. Yeah, so I think it really fits the art of the revolution in the way that it is a propaganda for like the connection of this heroicism, leading, walking, striding forward confidently, taking care of this young boy who was the guide, and kind of really underscoring the heroicism of this figure. Yeah, it was a little challenging for me to find a painting that gave good scholarly information, depicting like different war scenes. So I wanted to pick something a little outside the box that I think hit those themes with like leaning out of neoclassicism and still having this propaganda background. So that was, there you go. So there's my themes again. The French art uses propaganda. There's a fascination with this exoticism, not really seen in this particular image, but again, you know, really emphasizing just the heroicism. And while there's violence, I mean, he's been blinded, the boy's been harmed. It's still a really beautifully rendered depiction of both of them. And here's my source, which will be on Canvas.